The headline struck like a thunderbolt across the ticker tape. Trump slaps $100,000 fee on H-1B visas. The New York Times alert landed, and within minutes airports from Delhi to New York City dissolved into chaos. In India, long fluorescent terminals swarmed with stranded families and panicked students clutching passports. Airline boards flickered, canceled. Fares surged overnight to unreachable heights. What the Hindustan Times captured in one blunt phrase echoed across the globe: an extremely bad situation. The price wasn't just policy. It was pain. At San Francisco International, engineers huddled grimly over their phones, calculating if their dreams had just been snuffed out by a six-figure wall. In Bangalore, parents sobbed in check-in lines, forced abandoned flights that had emptied their savings. And deep in Silicon Valley, boardroom whispers turned into alarm bells. If talent costs $100,000 just to enter, what happens to America's innovation throne? And yet, half a world away, in a rally hall blazing with red banners, the reaction was the mirror image. Trump supporters cheered and waved signs. Finally, America first. For them, the news wasn't chaos, it was vindication. They framed it as a patriotic economic strike against an elite system that favored outsiders. Two polar worlds, two diametrically opposite reactions. And one man at the center, once again, bending the spotlight back on himself. Trump didn't just drop a policy. He staged a spectacle. The facts, as NPR reported, were stark. A $100,000 surcharge on high-skilled foreign workers' visas, part of a sweeping overhaul of America's approach to global talent, a move that threw hundreds of thousands of families, businesses, and students into uncertainty. But to Trump, it was job protection. To his critics, it was economic sabotage. To stranded travelers, it was simply devastation. The cameras showed both images side by side, cheering supporters in firelit rallies and disoriented parents trapped behind glass walls of airports. This was not just another immigration headline. It was a high-stakes gamble with global consequences, an atomic drop into an already divided world. And the haunting question hovered like smoke in the aftermath. Was this bold protection, or chaos dressed as policy? It would have been easy to dismiss as just another Trump headline, another immigration decree, another thunderclap in a years-long storm. But this one was different. Because the $100,000 H-1B surcharge wasn't just about paperwork or government revenue. It was about the soul of American innovation itself. For decades, the H-1B visa was the artery pumping Silicon Valley's beating heart. At Google, Microsoft, Apple, and thousands of startups, teams of Indian engineers, Chinese data scientists, and international innovators literally built the products shaping modern life. The code powering your phone, the AI curating your feeds, the servers holding up the global economy, stitched together by a workforce born overseas, but working in America. Now, with one stroke, all of that was put on a choke chain. NPR put it bluntly. The policy slapped hundreds of thousands of skilled workers with a six-figure entry toll. Overnight, what was once a competitive but accessible path became financial science fiction for most families. We're watching an innovation pipeline collapse. One economist told the network, describing it as equivalent of kneecapping your own team before the championship. And the fallout wasn't theoretical. It was instant. Indian airports erupted by the tens of thousands. The Hindustan Times described scenes of chaotic terminals, families stranded, and fares spiking beyond reach. These weren't policymakers, pundits, or think tankers. These were students with scholarships, young engineers headed for job offers, families mid-relocation. One day their future was certain. The next, boarded gates glared denied. But the stakes weren't just personal. They were political. Trump supporters hailed it as a masterstroke, as he thundered about protecting American jobs at rallies where chants melted into standing ovations. To them, the $100,000 fee symbolized fairness, a price tag designed to keep elites from exploiting American workers. Every stranded flight overseas was, in this framing, a seat protected for an American first. Yet beneath the roar, the numbers told a harsher truth. The tech industry warned loudly. Deporting global skill doesn't elevate local employment. it cripples the very companies driving the U.S. economy. Silicon Valley giants, already on edge from AI disruption and Chinese competitors, now face the prospect of starved talent pipelines just as the innovation war turned hot. Imagine America's dominance in technology, not toppled by foreign sabotage, but by self-inflicted policy wounds. That's why this story matters far beyond visas. It's a referendum on what America wants to be, a fortress protecting borders at all costs, or an open arena with the best minds, regardless of birthplace. Build the future. It's not just an economic policy. It's a cultural mirror revealing fears, ambitions, and the identities we cling to when we feel those slipping away. And looming over it all, Trump himself, once again wielding immigration not merely as policy, but as theatrical spectacle. The NYT called it part of a major overhaul, but critics whispered it was something else. Not policy planning, but populist stagecraft. Like with every Trump announcement, the real stakes weren't just in the fine print. They were in the social aftershocks. Because this wasn't just about visas. It was about power. It was about belonging. It was about whether America's future would be built by open collaboration or lock gates. And in the shadows of airports and boardrooms alike, a darker story began forming. One about a man whose career thrives on chaos itself. Because to understand this new move, you must understand the man behind it, the architect of disruption, the puppet master in shadows. Every dark story has its architect, and in this case, that architect is Donald J. Trump, a man who has made immigration crackdowns his brand and political theater his weapon. The $100,000 H-1B move wasn't born in a vacuum. For years, Trump built his political empire on the scaffolding of exclusionary nationalism. From the Muslim travel bans of his first presidency to his fiery rhetoric about walls and deportations, the narrative was always the same. Draw the line, tighten the borders, build walls both physical and symbolic. And in many ways, this H-1B shock was simply the sequel. The New York Times reporting made it clear Trump positioned the fee not as a penalty, but as protection, a declaration that American jobs, wages, and dignity had long been undermined by outsiders who, in his words, were lining up at the expense of working-class citizens. Standing at the podium, he framed the surcharge as justice, a direct transfer of opportunity from foreign elites back to forgotten Americans. But behind that rhetoric lived contradictions as wide as the ocean between San Francisco and Bangalore. Because while the rally halls thundered, Washington's business community seethed. NPR reported how the overhaul rippled within hours. CEOs warning of economic sabotage, economists calculating the knock-on effects. Far from saving American jobs, critics argued, the move threatened to cripple U.S. global competitiveness in technology and research. Trump, of course, has warned these contradictions before. Even in his first term, attempts to limit immigration came with brutal economic blowback, farmers struggling without migrant labor, tech firms choking on tighter talent pipelines, universities losing international students. The pattern repeated. A grand policy gesture proclaimed as victory, its operational chaos borne by everyday people. The $100,000 fee felt like the same old playbook, only cranked to nuclear volume. What made it darker was the timing. Hindustan Times described Indian airports locked in chaos. Ticket fares quadrupling overnight, students sobbing in to check luggage, real people stranded at gates, families cut off mid-journey. It looked less like leadership and more like a storm unleashed without preparation. But for Trump, critics argued that might have been the design. Because here's the uncomfortable truth. Trump thrives in chaos. He has mastered turning disruption into spotlight gold. Every protest, every global meltdown, every stranded student with a microphone thrust into their tearful face becomes another echo in the chorus of his spectacle. And yet, contradiction defines the antagonist archetype. Trump, the populist champion, paints himself as guardian of jobs, even as the backbone of U.S. tech, built on immigrant labor, twists under his policies. Trump, the businessman, has built towers with labor from migrants he now shuns. Trump, the defender of the American dream, speaks a language of exclusion that dismantles the very openness that once defined America's rise. This is why critics call him less policymaker, more showman kingpin. The fee was never about the math. It was never about the $100,000. It was about the message, a message weaponized in red-lit rallies and Fox News soundbites. America for Americans. Everyone else pay up. To his loyalists, that's strength. To his detractors, that's sabotage wrapped in spectacle. And like every great antagonist, Trump carries the aura of inevitability, the sense that his disruptions aren't stumbles but calculated provocations. NPR stressed the major overhaul implications, making clear this wasn't an offhand tweak. It was a cornerstone of his second-wave immigration agenda, as deliberate as it was devastating. So here he stands in the shadows of history, once more, a former president turned disruptor-in-chief, orchestrating global crisis at the scale of airports, boardrooms, and families. To his critics, a villain feeding off disorder. To his supporters, a warrior reminding America who it belongs to. And as the chaos spread, from New York to New Delhi, from family kitchens to corporate war rooms, another story simmered in the silence. The story of those caught in the crossfire. People whose lives, futures, and dreams became collateral in a billionaire's political chess game. And the immigrants, the dreamers, the innovators, were about to step into frame as the true protagonists of the saga. When history remembers the September 2025 H-1B earthquake, it won't just record a line about a $100,000 fee. It will remember the faces in the airports, the faces behind the glass, the faces turned away at gates while screens blared canceled, because the real heroes of this saga aren't wearing ties on podiums. They're the students clutching their acceptance letters, the programmers clutching their laptops, the parents clutching passports for children born with more hope than money. H-1B visas weren't just a document for them. They were lifelines. They were the spine of a promise that talent, not birthright, was supposed to dictate your future. Take Mira, a 24-year-old graduate student from Mumbai. She had landed a scholarship at Stanford, ticket booked, suitcases packed. Then Trump's speech crackled across the news. A $100,000 fee for every H-1B visa. Airline apps exploded, ticket costs soaring. Her dreams of setting foot in Silicon Valley suddenly dissolved in the blinking of a terminal screen. To pay the new fee, she calculated, would take her family decades. She sat in a crowded airport in tears, future boarded shut by a lawmaker's flourish. Or Rajesh, a mid-career software architect with a U.S. job offer. He had sold his Mumbai apartment, pulled his children out of school, told his parents goodbye. Then, overnight, the plan collapsed. $100,000 wasn't a professional fee. It was a wall. A wall as real as steel, as cold as concrete. Multiply Mira and Rajesh by hundreds of thousands. Each story different, but identical in heartbreak. And beyond airports and families, a bigger drama brewed in the engine room of America's economy. Tech giants, Google, Microsoft, Apple. Others surged not just American graduates, but waves of global talent-feeding innovation labs. Sundar Pichai, Satya Nadella, Indra Nooyi, names that transformed industries, all born abroad, all products of the immigration pipelines Trump now threatened to choke. The Hindustan Times called it bluntly, an extremely bad situation, not just for Indian families, but for one of the world's most important economic corridors, the bridge between U.S. innovation and Indian engineering powerhouses. The chaos triggered more than terrors at terminals. It triggered panic in boardrooms. Because when the future coders, engineers, and dreamers get priced out, America's edge doesn't sharpen. It dulls. And yet, amid this darkness, resilience flickered. That's the paradox of protagonists in this drama. They are vulnerable yet unbroken. At JFK Airport, volunteer groups showed up with food and translation for stranded families. At Stanford, students organized petitions demanding exemptions. On Reddit and X, immigrant communities pooled resources, spreading urgent information. Who qualified, who could appeal, who could find legal loopholes. Families huddled together across time zones, whispering hope into Skype calls to children stranded mid-journey. For them, the fight was not abstract. It wasn't partisan. It wasn't applause lines or rally chants. It was survival and dignity, and the belief that the so-called American dream could not be extinguished by one man's decree. Critics framed Trump as the villain. But in this scripted clash of hero and antagonist, the immigrants, the dreamers, the innovators, They embody timeless heroism not because they choose confrontation, but because they endure it. Their very existence, their refusal to stop chasing the light despite yet another wall of darkness, becomes the act of defiance. That's why CEOs and community leaders rose in their defense so forcefully. NPR captured the voices warning that tens of thousands of high-skilled workers were now priced out. Business leaders didn't just cry economic loss. They pointed at human potential cut down mid-stride. For them, this wasn't just a spreadsheet. It was generations of talent, creativity, and courage doused by political spectacle. And the story reverberated in something larger, too. America's identity has always been wrapped in the myth of the immigrant hero, the Ellis Island arrival, the factory worker, the builder of futures. The H-1B dream was simply that myth updated. Not a ship into New York Harbor, but a plane into San Francisco Bay. Not building railroads or factories, but building the code and innovation defining the 21st century. So when Trump dropped his $100,000 thunderclap, the true protagonists weren't the analysts debating on cable screens. They were the people forced to fight through despair yet again. Their courage, their refusal to surrender to chaos, that's where the moral backbone of the saga resides. And as their voices began to rise, through cries at airports, testimonies in newsrooms, hashtags online, something larger snapped into focus. This wasn't just an immigration policy shock. This was a global debate about who gets to build tomorrow. And the heroes, despite being stranded, silenced, or priced out, were not going away quietly, because resilience itself had become their counterattack. The rumble began online, and within hours it sounded like a war drum. On Twitter, on X, two hashtags rose like gladiator banners over a chaotic battlefield. On one side, hashtag America First Victory, fueled by Trump loyalists posting flag emojis and memes of closed gates protecting American jobs. On the other, hashtag Visapocalypse, carried by immigrants, students, and tech workers sharing raw videos of stranded families, sobbing parents, and flight refunds evaporating in real time. The contrast was savage. In one feed, a Trump supporter blasted, "Finally, time to stop foreigners from stealing jobs that belong to American kids. Pay your $100,000 or stay home." Replies roared with applause emojis, gifs of Trump smirking, chants of USA. USA. In the opposite corner, an Indian graduate student shot back, posting a TikTok clip from a Delhi airport packed with restless families. "My dream school gave me a scholarship. Trump just gave me a $100,000 invoice." Her video racked up millions of views in 24 hours. Underneath, comments seethed. "How is this fair? How is this freedom?" And like a coliseum, the crowd poured in, bloodthirsty for debate. Cable news networks leaned hard into the drama. On CNN, tech leaders warned the policy was economic suicide. On Fox News, pundits hailed it as finally drawing a line. Scrappy panelists in boxes on screen yelled atop one another, sound bouncing like sword strikes. The anchors didn't bother hiding it. They wanted a clash. Is Trump saving jobs or strangling innovation? Flashed across the cheering in bold red. Meanwhile, NPR's quieter tone was drowned in the noise. Economists tried to dissect the devastating math. Hundreds of thousands priced out, billions in potential innovation loss. But spectacle doesn't pause for math. In the arena of attention, volume wins over nuance. And volume was everywhere. Facebook groups bubbled with anger on both sides. Indian community networks organized protests at U.S. embassies. MAGA loyalists designed digital posters celebrating Trump, taxing globalists $100,000 a head. WhatsApp groups in Bangalore and Hyderabad lit up with frantic advice. Sell assets, crowdsource loans, find loopholes. Families weren't debating in abstract. They were scrambling to survive. This was more than argument. It was a cultural war playing out pixel by pixel. At the dark heart of it, irony thrived. Trump allies roared about protecting jobs, but videos circulated of tech CEOs warning job losses in America would now skyrocket because of frozen projects, gutted startups, delayed innovation. Twitter threads turned vicious, mocking each camp. Critics sneered job protection was a mask for xenophobia. Loyalists mocked immigrant tears as deserved punishment, and caught between ordinary Americans unsure what the truth actually was. Parents in Ohio watching one network praise Trump's crackdown, while their kids in STEM programs whispered at their professors and classmates, half of them immigrants, might be gone. The confusion was its own battle, leaving people tired, wary, and polarized. But then the arena reached its fever pitch. Viral clips circulated of families stranded in chaotic airports spliced side by side with Trump bellowing, "Protecting you," at rallies while supporters waved banners. The juxtaposition was stark, and each side weaponized it differently. To critics, it was cruelty on display. To loyalists, it was leadership personified. And just like that, the audience leaned forward. Because if the heroes were being crushed by debate and derision, what came next would have to be something more. Something louder, sharper. Every story builds to a breaking point. Every gladiator dual waits for the fatal blow. And the counterattack, when it came, would hit like a hammer. Because amidst all this noise, the immigrants and innovators were about to land a strike that no one, supporters or skeptics, could ignore. The noise was deafening. The hashtags, the shouting panels, the memes. For a week straight, America was locked inside a digital coliseum, warriors and pixels tearing at each other in endless chaos. And then the hero struck. It didn't come with chance. It didn't come with hashtags. It came with numbers, with tears, with testimony too raw to ignore. The first strike, Silicon Valley. One after another, titans of tech stepped onto live cameras and dropped their verdict. Google CEO warned, "You can't put a $100,000 toll booth in front of innovation and expect America to lead." Microsoft's leaders echoed the blow. "Talent is borderless. If we shut out, it's simply build somewhere else, in Bangalore, in Beijing, maybe never in Palo Alto again." NPR reported it plainly. Tens of thousands of high-skilled workers now priced out. Economists traced the ripple. Project delayed, startups collapsing, billions in potential innovation lost. In interviews, investors scoffed. This isn't policy. It's self-sabotage. The second strike landed harder. Families themselves spoke. One clip went viral. A young Indian mother at Delhi airport pressing her child's face against the glass as her husband, visa papers in hand, was turned away. "We saved for years," she sobbed. "America wanted his skills yesterday. Today they charge us $100,000 to enter. How can we pay that?" The video spread across TikTok, Facebook, YouTube. Millions shared, millions wept, millions raged. This wasn't abstract anymore. It wasn't slogans versus sound bites. It was faces. Children cut off from their fathers. Students cut off from their dreams. And the counterattack built momentum. CEOs combined with human stories. A 1-2 punch landing on the very heart of Trump's narrative. "This isn't saving jobs," a Silicon Valley founder declared on Bloomberg Live. "This is exporting them. To China. To India. To anyone willing to take the brains America just turned away." The audience audibly gasped on air, the rare moment when even financial analysts looked rattled. And then came the mic drop line. An op-ed from a renowned economist ripped across every platform. If the world's best engineer must pay $100,000 to work in California, but $0 to work in Shanghai, who wins? Not us. The phrase metastasized into memes, tweets, headlines. Simple, sharpened, devastating. Meanwhile, families kept lighting up feeds. A scholarship winner from Mumbai recorded a shaky iPhone video inside the terminal. "Stanford gave me a full ride. Donald Trump gave me debt I'll never repay." Cut. Next clip. A father back in Texas holding a sign at a protest. "My employee can't afford to stay. Neither can my company." The juxtaposition slammed into the wider public like a tidal wave. And it wasn't just immigrant voices. American students and workers rose too. Polls flashed on the evening news. Young Americans rejecting the fee, citing global collaboration over protectionist walls. At protests in New York, placards read, "Innovation has no borders. You don't price dreams at $100,000. Each chant on the street answered the chants at Trump's rallies. call and response in America's fractured identity crisis. The chaos reaches crescendo in a televised debate, clips now permanently engraved in memory. A Trump surrogate declared, "This policy makes America strong again, finally putting our workers first." He smirked, leaning back. The host pivoted to the other guest. A 22-year-old immigrant student pulled into the spotlight. She didn't yell. She didn't posture. She simply unfolded her Stanford admission letter and held it up beside the $100,000 invoice. The camera lingered on the contrast, one page promising opportunity, the other locking away. The room went silent, and a murmur spread across the comment threads that night. Mic dropped. Because sometimes the most crushing argument isn't a sophisticated debate or policy white paper. Sometimes it'll face a voice, a simple moment caught on live television. And that moment belonged entirely to the heroes. The counterattack reverberated, not as noise but as clarity. Hashtag shifted. Hashtag Visapocalypse melted into hashtag let them work. News anchors stopped screaming and started asking harder questions. Politicians abroad called it what it was, sabotage. Even American companies whispered about pulling future labs overseas if the cliff wasn't pulled back. And through it all, the antagonist didn't flinch. Trump doubled down at rallies, sneering at tech elites crying on TV. His supporters still cheered. But something sharp had pierced the sound chamber. Because the heroes, the innovators, the families, the voices of resilience, had finally landed their blow, not with louder shouting, but with undeniable truth. The spectacle cracked, just enough for millions of Americans watching in silence to wonder, if the cost of protection is breaking our own future, was this protection at all? And in the sinister quiet that followed, one thing was clear. The shockwaves of this counterattack wouldn't just echo in airports and tweets. They would reverberate in politics, in boardrooms, in the streets, shaping what came next in ways Trump himself may not have anticipated. And the very first tremors of those shockwaves erupted almost instantly. The counterattack had landed like a hammer, but hammers don't end stories. They begin avalanches. And in the days that followed, the tremors shook everything from TikTok to parliament halls. The digital battlefield was the first to fracture. Hashtags mutated. Where once hashtag Visapocalypse had screamed panic, now hashtag Let Them Work surged, fueled by viral clips of stranded students and emotional testimony. Almost overnight, the imagery shifted too. Instead of closed gates and barriers, timelines filled with protest signs declaring innovation has no borders and don't tax dreams. And yet, the rival side dug deeper trenches. Trump loyalists doubled their fury, rallying behind hashtag America First Victory, memes mocking immigrant tears, and triumphant montages of cheering supporters. Social media didn't evolve into consensus. It hardened into civil war. The echo chambers became more dangerous than debates. On one side, immigrant families traded urgent legal advice in WhatsApp chats. Who can appeal? Who can pay? Who needs to leave? On the other, populist influencers echoed Trump's line, branding every crying engineer or student as proof of elitists weeping because the free ride ended. Meanwhile, outside the digital arena, reality roared louder than memes. Airports remained pressure cookers. NYTimes cameras captured images of families sleeping on floors in Delhi, unclaimed luggage piled high, boarding gates swarmed by frustrated passengers demanding answers. Airline fares spiked astronomically. One report noted Delhi-New York tickets climbing to 5 times the price within 48 hours. Travel agents called it unprecedented turmoil. The corporate world shook too. Tech analysts reported hiring freezes spreading across startups like wildfire, venture funding being reevaluated or pulled altogether. NPR interviews highlighted company executives admitting candidly, "We can't afford $100,000 imports for every engineer. We just shut down 2 projects." Across Wall Street, traders whispered what no one wanted to say aloud. Was America letting go of its innovation crown? It wasn't abstract anymore. Global markets trembled, watching to see whether India or China would absorb the talent exodus. The phrase brain drain trended in headlines once again, and this time, critics suggested the drain wasn't leaving developing nations for America. It was leaving America itself. And then the politics ignited. India's government, already under pressure from surging airfare chaos, issued public statements slamming the policy. Diplomats called the fee an intentional barrier, not immigration reform. Indian students protested outside U.S. consulates, petitioning for interventions. Behind closed doors, whispers suggested that trade agreements might sour unless relief was negotiated. In Washington, Republican allies of Trump praised a courageous defense of the American worker, but Democratic lawmakers seized microphones to call the policy xenophobic grandstanding at the cost of U.S. leadership. Hearings were promised. Editorials filled with fiery language accused Trump of dismantling America in the guise of saving it. By now, global media had joined the pylon. The BBC called it a political wildfire. French papers noted the irony. America, from a land of immigrants to the land closing doors. CNBC India framed it as a new Berlin Wall, but written in policy language. Even neutral coverage dripped with alarmism. Keynote panels framed it as a defining question of American identity. Was it fortress politics or worldwide leadership? But while politicians and pundits rage, the human cost pressed onward without pause. Families continued to break apart mid-journey. Students ran numbers like failed accountants trying to calculate an impossible debt. Employers drafted apologetic letters to workers unable to enter. Behind each headline, the quiet rhythm of ordinary lives disrupted became its own haunting chorus. And through it all, Trump's rallies didn't falter. He leaned into the chaos, sneering on stage about elitists crying on camera while crowds howled in approval. He knew the shockwaves weren't weaknesses. They were oxygen. For every stranded family sobbing on live feeds, his image at a podium swelled larger, the fighter against globalist abuse, branding reinforced. But not all shockwaves serve their source. Some ricochet, some rebound. And this one had a pulse of its own. Because as footage of despair clashed with footage of celebration, millions of Americans found themselves split. Was this really saving jobs, or just breaking futures? By the end of the week, one thing was certain. The story had escaped control. It wasn't just an executive decision anymore. It was a global flashpoint, a symbol, a wedge scraping deep cracks into America's reputation and its promise. And as the dust settled into uneasy pause, one question loomed more loudly than all the chants and hashtags combined. What, if anything, was a lasting lesson in this chaos? And when the roar subsided, when the hashtags cooled and the airports calmed into exhausted silence, one truth remained floating in the air like smoke after a fire. This was never just about a number, $100,000. It was never just about policy or visas. This was about who gets to build the future. The H-1B fee was more than an immigration hurdle. It was a mirror held to America itself. For over a century, the nation's strength came not only from crops or steel or oil, but from the dreams it harvested across oceans. The promise was blunt yet luminous. Bring us your talent, your hungry innovators, and we will build greatness together. From the factories fueling the industrial age to the labs launching rockets to the moon, America's identity was the immigrant myth updated at every generation. But this policy flipped that story. From an open invitation to a locked vault with a $100,000 key. To Trump supporters, that key represented fairness, a long overdue defense of jobs for the forgotten American worker. And politics will always find a crowd for protectionist walls. But history rarely bows to walls. It carves through them. And that may be the cruelest irony of all. In trying to protect America, the fear revealed a fault line where protection shaded into self-destruction. Because the heroes of this story, students, dreamers, coders, parents, didn't just represent themselves. They represented pipelines of possibility. Every priced-out engineer was not one job block for an American. It was one startup unfounded, one AI breakthrough delayed, one economy weakened at the knees. The lesson, then, is sharp. Political theater may buy applause and rallies, but innovation does not answer to applause. It answers to opportunity. And here lies the unsettling moral. When leaders trade in spectacle over substance, when they gamble national futures for short-term populist fireworks, the cost is paid not by them, but by the voiceless. by the families stranded in terminals, by the students shut out of labs, by the companies who discover their walls of vision crashing into walls of policy. It's a reminder, too, of how fragile trust has become. In a hyperglobal world, where talent chooses geography like commodities, America's edge is not an entitlement. It must be earned daily. Erecting a $100,000 toll booth in front of the gates doesn't project confidence. It signals fear. And yet, amid the darkness, the human reaction tells us something else too. Resilience. The protests, the petitions, the stories that circulated. They prove that the immigrant dream doesn't die easily. It bends. It weeps. It breaks apart in airport terminals. But it regenerates. And in that regeneration lies the hope that no policy alone can extinguish. The belief that talent will always seek a way to build. So what lesson lingers from this spectacle? Perhaps it is this: that strength built on exclusion is brittle. That progress thrives not in silence, but in shared spaces where diverse voices collide and innovate. And that a nation is never diminished by the talent it lets in, but always by the talent it fearfully turns away. Trump's $100,000 Shockwave will be debated, memed, weaponized again and again. His rallies will present it as protection. His critics will present it as betrayal. But beyond the noise, the human ledger is clear. The policy turned dreams into invoices, futures into debts, hope into collateral. And maybe that is the deepest moral here. Politics can inflate walls, charge tolls, and spin sound bites, but the future itself refuses taxation. Whether America chooses inclusion or exclusion, the future will be built somewhere. The only question, echoing long after the rallies end and airports empty, is whether America still wants to be the place where it's built. The story began with a single number, $100,000, a price tag that turned airports into battlegrounds, families into collateral, and the global stage into a tug-of-war over the future of work. But this wasn't only about visas. It wasn't only about politics. It was about the kind of country America chooses to be, and the kind of world it wants to lead. In the days since Trump's announcement, we've seen cheers and tears, victories proclaimed and futures shattered. We've seen the powerful defend the price, and the powerless forced to pay it. We've seen the spectacle thrive while humanity strained under its weight. This was the $100,000 H-1B shockwave. And like every shockwave, its damage spreads far beyond the point of impact, to boardrooms, to classrooms, to airports, to families, and the aftereffects will echo for years. So here's the real question, the one that lingers after the headlines fade. Is this the protection of American workers, or the sabotage of America's future? That isn't just a question for politicians or CEOs. It's for all of us. Because every story like this becomes part of global narrative. And our reactions, our beliefs, even our silence, they all determine how the next chapter gets written. If you believe these stories matter, if you want to see power challenged and futures defended, then this is the place. Hit subscribe to join the movement. Smash that share button so others see what's really happening behind the headlines. And drop your take below. Was this bold protection or chaos dressed as policy? The spectacle has been staged. The echoes still ring. Now it's your move.